How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to the Panther Nation recap show for Week 12 of the 2018 football season here. The Pitt Panthers coming off a 52-24 victory over the Duke Blue Devils on the back of a 6-touchdown Kenny Pickett performance. Easily his best game of his young career. The sophomore finally looking like he might be putting it all together. A 260-yard performance against Georgia Tech last week led into now a 288-yard passing performance. 5 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown as well from Kenny. An unbelievable day at the office for him. The Panthers put up 532 yards of total offense. Duke didn't do so bad themselves. 490 yards of total offense. They ran for almost 90 still. 405 passing yards, but 4 turnovers are what did them in this game. They had a fumble, 3 interceptions versus the Panthers. Clean bill of health, not a single turnover that really helped them get the job done. And Kenny, it has to be said, incredibly efficient performance. 13 for 20 for 288 yards. He was averaging 22 yards a completion. Olesen had 80 yards rushing. Darren Hall had 98 yards rushing. Pickett only had to carry 4 times. He had 43 yards, including 49 yards on a run right before the end of the half. Unbelievable job from him. Trey Tipton, 3 catches. Good solid performance. Maurice French, 3 catches for 80. Aaron Matthews, 2 catches for 86 yards. All he does is score touchdowns. 2 long touchdown catches for him. Just a great game overall by the Panthers. You have to say, the defense even, you knew Duke was going to run a hurry up. You knew they were going to pass. They had almost 60 pass attempts on the game. So you can't really blame the Panthers D for giving up 400 yards, because when a team passes 60 times on you, they're probably going to get some yards. It's just the nature of how the game goes. But credit to the Panthers. They were resilient. They kept Duke out of the end zone as best they could. 3 interceptions, including one at the end of the first half that Jazzy Stalker made with his foot out of the end zone. Unbelievable play by him on that one. So, some good play by the Panthers, you have to say. Of course, they'll take what they can get. They needed the win. It was a convincing win. You'd expect it should be one that should hopefully move them up in the polls, because, Duke's not a great team. They came in at 3-6, but when the Panthers handily beat another team, you'd expect that would reflect well on their resume, no matter what the yardage totals say. But a great game. Kenny Pickett, maybe could it be that first ACC player of the week for him or any of our offensive players? We'll have to wait and see. ACC, though, the Panthers came with a victory, and NC State 24-21 over Virginia Tech. Georgia Tech 31-27 over Miami. That effectively knocks Virginia Tech out of ACC Coastal Division title hopes. Miami losing means that they have to win their next ACC game, which I believe is against Virginia. And if they don't win that, the Panthers will have won the ACC Coastal pretty much by default if they can win their next game before the Miami game, which Pitt takes on 4-6 North Carolina next week, who just beat Virginia. You can see Florida State knocked off BC. Clemson blows out Syracuse. They have the inside track for the ACC Atlantic, but Louisville could win it, as could Florida State, depending on how their final conference games shake out. We look around the top 25. Oklahoma blows out Texas Tech. They go 44-21 to go to 9-0. Penn State knocks off unbeaten Ohio State 38-21. Huge game for Trace McSorley. I think he had 4 total touchdowns. An unbelievable day for him. And just like that, Penn State is in the driver's seat for the Big Ten crown. Florida State, of course, Middle Tennessee State over FIU. Florida beat South Carolina. Texas, an easy win over Baylor. Most of the ranked teams did their job. Michigan, it took them a little bit extra time in overtime to knock off Indiana. Louisville knocked off Wake. Georgia, in a huge game, beats Auburn to go to 9-1. Auburn, that pretty much takes them out of contention for an SEC division crown. And knocks off any hope they had to get into the playoff. Arkansas State goes to 8-1 with their victory over Georgia State. Big win for them. Washington blows out Colorado, so rough stretch of games for the Buffaloes, and the Huskies go to 10-0. UCLA to 11-0 with a victory over Arizona State, and their opponent in their last game is going to be USC, who is 0-11. That is unthinkable. It's the worst season in Trojan history. They lose to Stanford. They lost Sam Darnold. They lost some big pieces. And just like that, they're 0-11. That's unreal. I have never seen a USC team so bad. But it was a huge week for college football. And, of course, for the Panthers, a huge week for them. Big recruit signing. Dennis Rogers of Levittown, PA, 6'1", 222 pounds, commits to the Panthers. He was interested in some other Northeast schools. Army was the biggest contender, with Rutgers, Syracuse, and Dub V showing interest as well. He's not a superstar by any means. He's just a good depth player. The Panthers losing, of course, 2 outside linebackers. He's the first outside linebacker to commit to the Panthers. He's not the big fish we want, but he's got good speed, good acceleration. He's a decent tackler, and he should play a role in the future. Players of the week following this week's games: Mark Fields, 2 picks in Clemson's victory over Syracuse, and then Kyle Shermer, 6 total touchdowns for Vanderbilt in their victory over Kentucky, wins NCAA Player of the Week. We had our own quarterback with 6 total touchdowns. Can he get ACC Player of the Week? We'll have to wait and see here. Mark Fields, you can imagine, gets ACC Defensive Player of the Week, but Kelly Bryant, 6 total touchdowns of his own, but he had an even more efficient performance than Pickett. He outdid him by about 10 rushing yards, about 40 passing yards, and he was 18 for 20 instead of 13 for 20. So unfortunately, Kenny Pickett, not Offensive Player of the Week, but he is in our hearts. Darius Geis, LSU beat Bama in their last game. They were off this week, but you got to think he's pretty close to wrapping up the Heisman Trophy at this point. Kaiser was off as well. Joe Burrow, nice game in the loss to Penn State. 115 rushing yards and 175 passing yards, but he lost. Lamar Jackson, 4 touchdowns in the win over Wake. He's trying to make a late comeback there. And Hayden Moore of Cincinnati also in the running. Coaches poll now: LSU number 1, Washington 2, UCLA 3, Oklahoma 4. Those are your 4 unbeatens, but one of them will for sure not finish unbeaten. Washington and UCLA on a crash course in the Pac-12 championship game. Georgia, Notre Dame, if they can win out either of them, they may have an opportunity to sneak into the playoff. You got the likes of Ohio State, Pitt. They still have outside chances. Ohio State could backdoor their way into the Big Ten championship. Pitt could definitely get into the ACC championship and win that. Clemson, you got to figure if they win out and get the ACC championship, even with 2 losses, they'll have a good shot at getting into the playoff potentially. So there are some teams that have possibility. Penn State with 2 losses could get in if they win the Big Ten. Tennessee could technically still win the SEC, so they could have a chance. You never know how things will shake out. Auburn, you can see, drops back to 17 with their loss. They're probably out of it, and you can take a look at the remainder of the top 10. Some 1-loss teams lower down, but they're all group of 5 teams that have very poor schedules, so you're not expecting any chance of them getting into the playoff. But there's a lot to still play for the remainder of this season. Oklahoma can win out and win the Big 12 title without playing a championship game, of course, so that may hurt them, but it'll also, if they finish unbeaten, you'd have to think they're in no matter what. LSU can win out. Washington, UCLA will have to play each other at some point in the Pac-12 championship game, so one of them is going to lose somewhere down the line. BCS sees those as your top 4. Pitt's at 8th. Of course, if the Panthers win out and win the ACC crown, you have to think more than likely they'd get in. They'd probably leapfrog someone like Oklahoma, who hasn't had the strongest schedule, even though they're unbeaten. So that's where we stand right now in the rankings. There will be, of course, a playoff ranking coming out before week 14. We do have some bowl projections for you right now. If your favorite team's in here, take a look. But this is the earliest the bowl projections come out here in the beginning of week 13. So we can take a look and see where the teams are projected. The Panthers right now in the Orange Bowl against Texas, which would be the ACC championship. They're projected as the ACC champions right now. Clemson in the Sugar Bowl is an at-large from the ACC as well. National championship, of course, just shows 1 and 2 because we have to factor in the playoff. That'd be Washington, LSU. UCLA would also be in there, as would Oklahoma as it stands right now. But they got, the likes of the remainder of what would have been the BCS Bowls you can take a look at in the projections there. For the Panthers, the ACC Coastal is all to play for. If they win this week and Miami loses to Virginia, if the Panthers beat North Carolina, Miami loses to Virginia, the Panthers would win the Coastal Division. It's Pitt or Miami. If both teams win, when the Panthers head to South Beach to take on the Hurricanes, the winner there, or Coral Gables, I guess technically is where Miami is, but the winner there would take home the Coastal Division Championship and make the ACC Championship game. Clemson has the inside track in the Atlantic. They have one conference game left. If they win it, they'll win the Atlantic. Florida State would win it if Clemson loses and they win. If both of them were to lose, Louisville could win it. And if all three of them were to lose, NC State could technically win it. So a lot to play for in the Atlantic, but I would expect Clemson to win because I think their last game's against like Wake Forest or somebody who's not a particularly exciting opponent. Boston College, who's been struggling of late as we look at the ACC slate of games this week. Big games around the country. Oklahoma State heads to Texas. The Longhorns technically could still win the Big 12 if Oklahoma somehow fell off a cliff. Penn State looking to hold on to their momentum with a tough matchup with a Michigan State team that has a lot to play for. Good defense as they always seem to have. So Penn State will have to go into Spartan Stadium and come away with a win because they're not out of the woods as far as the Big 12 title is concerned because they have one loss in conference already, or Big 10 title. They have one loss in conference already. NC State, Louisville, big game there. The winner still would have a chance at the ACC division crown to get to the ACC championship. Auburn, LSU, the Tigers are probably out of the SEC championship race, but they could win out and maybe force their hand in there if they can beat LSU and then Alabama after that. So huge game there. Clemson, if they win the ACC Coastal Atlantic Division, and they'll head to Chestnut Hill to take on Boston College to try and do just that. And of course, for your Pitt Panthers, they're hosting the North Carolina Tar Heels. It'll be senior night at Heinz Field, and the Panthers are going to host an NC team that has really just not been great. Their offense has struggled. Nathan Elliott, their quarterback's been okay. He's got a good TD to interception ratio, but yardage-wise, they're in the bottom 20 of the country. Defense, they're in the bottom third of the country. They've really just struggled across the board, and you'd expect the way the Panthers have played that they should have a good performance in this one. But you never know with North Carolina. The Tar Heels are on a hot streak. As we look at their schedule, they went on a 6-game losing skid here in the middle of the season. Lost to Florida State, Arkansas State, blown out by Clemson, blown out by Miami, blown out by Georgia Tech. But they've turned it around lately. A win over Colorado State non-conference. And then all of a sudden, they've come forward and won some games. They beat Virginia Tech, which is a big win for them. Of course, the Panthers beat Virginia Tech as well. And then they beat Virginia, so the Virginia schools both fell to the Panthers. North Carolina's kind of been a bogey school for the Panthers. Of course, they beat Pitt last season in Chapel Hill 34-27. And so the Panthers, are out for revenge. And, of course, they'll need it if they want to coast to the ACC Coastal Division title. No pun intended there. Nathan Elliott, like we said, good player. He's been more consistent of late, but they don't really have any super standouts that have overachieved for them. Kenny Pickett's been a real leader for the Panthers lately. He's gone up to 14 TDs to 7 picks now. Stat line actually fairly similar to Elliott, but a much better completion percentage. Darren Hall and Quadri Olison are going to be the feature backs for the Panthers and the real keys to this game. If the Panthers can run down that North Carolina defense, then they'll have a chance. But UNC does have some good options. As we look at their lineup, they don't have a ton of studs. They only have 3 players at 90 overall, but they have a lot of solid talent. They're B+ overall, as are the Panthers actually, and they have a pretty well-rounded team. Elliott's actually good. He can run if he needs to. You'll look at his stats here and you'll see that he doesn't really run very often. Caleb Henderson was actually the quarterback that shredded us last season to the tune of like 400 passing yards because Elliott was injured, but he's back this year, and you can see he's been much improved. He was about a 50-50 touchdown to interception guy the last 2 seasons. This year, 17 TDs to 7 picks. Completion percentage has gone up. Doesn't run the ball very much, like I mentioned, but he's been efficient when passing it. You can see Henderson hasn't played at all this year. Last year, he was a 50-50 guy as well. Not great, but he shredded us in the game that he needed to, and so North Carolina knows how to beat us. They don't have the stud running back Elijah Hood like they did previously. They have Jordan Brown, who's only averaging about 76 yards a game. Not been great. And the Panthers have had a very solid rush defense this year. So if North Carolina is going to win, you'd expect it to be through the air and maybe a similar stat line to what Daniel Jones of Duke put up last week, 300, 400 yards, because you'd expect they're going to be passing a lot. But if you look at their lineup, what's amazing about them, if you saw those halfbacks, they're all so young. They have 4 halfbacks that were either, I believe, freshmen or redshirt freshmen that all have good amount of potential and good amount of talent. And same thing with their receiving core here. I think they have 4 senior receivers, or upperclassmen at least, juniors and seniors, that are pretty solid, mid-80s, but they have some really good freshmen. Wade is fantastic. He's already playing for them. Reed is a good player as well as a redshirt freshman, so they have some good talent. You can see Wade's actually very similar to our own Paul Lease in that he's a fast player, can get into space and make some moves. They have a good tight end core. Fritz, Vargas, Tucker, all really solid players that can make an impact as well in the passing game. If you look at their offensive line, very solid. McCargo's 85 overall as a sophomore, so he's a solid player. Polino, 85 overall as a junior, is a good player. Carter, of course, is their weak point freshman starting center. Something we can maybe exploit through the middle with the couple good defensive tackles we have. Keyshawn Camp especially should have a nice day. But then the remainder of their line, all 86 overall. So, and they're not, I don't think they have any seniors on their line. So next year, you'd expect NC to be very, very good. And same thing, Joe Wilson, 86 overall as a true sophomore pass rusher out of Front Royal, Virginia. 5.5 sacks already this season. Very good player that we're going to have to contend with for at least 2 more seasons. Carney's a good player as well, 86 senior. Clark and Dalton are fantastic through the middle. So our interior linemen are really going to have their handful. Dinkins as well, good player. Thankfully, they're all seniors, will be gone next year. But a lot of talent on this North Carolina team. They've really struggled, like we mentioned, only 4-6 overall. But if you look, pretty much every starter is 85, 86, 87, something with a very high talent level. Artists as well, 87 overall. So they're really, really solid. It's pretty clear throughout their team. Like I said, their weakest points are probably they don't have a great halfback. Their center is definitely a weak point, but cornerback, not great. 84 is their best corner, but we don't have any real stud receivers. The one thing we could say is probably their top corners don't have fantastic speed, so maybe we could use those deep balls to our advantage again. But where we really killed Duke on the deep balls was they were not playing any high safety coverage at all. That allowed us to get over the top of them. You'd expect North Carolina would watch that film, learn from that, and play a little bit smarter with their safeties and with their coverage. But it should be a fantastic game. The Panthers will definitely be motivated because it is senior night. It's the last home game of the season. If they win, they're on track still for the ACC Coastal Division title. They want to knock off North Carolina for the damage they did to them last year and started that really negative spiral for the Panthers. They lost to North Carolina, Miami, and then their bowl game, Texas A&M, in succession. So the Panthers have some payback to give to them. What do you think the score will be? Let me know in the comments. As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon on the Pitt Panthers Football Network. As always, hail to Pitt. Take care. Bye-bye.